Welcome to the Divorce View Talk Show. Hello, it's Joanie Winberg, divorce mentor and founder of the Fresh Start After Divorce community, as well as How to Emotionally Survive Divorce online courses. It's always my pleasure and honor to do this show with my co-host, Rosalind and Sedacca. Hello, Roz.
Hi, Joanie. Good to see you again. I'm Rosalind and Sedacca. I'm recognized as the voice of child-centered divorce, a divorce and parenting coach, and founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network. And we have a wonderful guest with us today who is going to be speaking about one of the most difficult facets of handling a divorce. And his name is Charles Jamieson. He's a collaborative attorney, and he's based in the West Palm Beach, Florida area. Joanie, why don't you get started?
Absolutely. Just to give you a little bit of background about Charlie, since 2009, Charlie has been board certified in marital and family law by the Florida Bar. He has practiced law for more than 30 years and is experienced in the complicated issues related to child custody, visitations, and many other family law issues. So welcome, Charlie. We're thrilled you're here.
Thanks for the pleasure and honor of being here.
I'm thrilled. And we're actually, as Roz mentioned, we're going to talk about, what do you do when your ex begins to badmouth you to your children? And as we had previously talked about, April 25th is Parental Alienation Awareness Day, which is, as Roz mentioned, a sad day, but something we have to certainly get people to become aware of. So, Charlie, why don't you kick this off and help us understand, what is parental alienation so that we can have an understanding of this right from the beginning?
Sure. Parental alienation is a process or pattern of behavior where one parent, which we usually designate as the alienating parent, is either consciously or subconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally saying things or doing things which block, impede, hinder, or otherwise alienates the child's relationship with the targeted parent.
So you're seeing this firsthand, I'm sure, and how it affects the children. So as far as, do you feel that people really understand the signs of this? Would that be helpful for our listeners to first understand the signs of parent alienation?
What we look at are two major factors. One is what was the relationship between the targeted parent and the child to begin with. It was a close, loving relationship, and all at once it's turned topsy-turvy, and the child is denigrating, saying negative things to the targeted parent or about the targeted parent, wants nothing to do with the targeted parent, makes excuses for not having contact with the targeted parent. Then we have to be very concerned that some kind of alienation process or pattern of behavior is developing.
And I know you have a great article, The 10 Signs of When the Alienation Starts. Anything in particular that you'd like to share with us, that signs that you specifically see as well, that you just, to kind of expand on what you just said?
The issues may not just generate from what the child says or does. For instance, let's say the alienating parent all at once starts becoming a stringent gatekeeper. In other words, you can't get contact with your child. Or the alienating parent sets up what I call more enticing alternatives for the child's time rather than spending time with you. Oh, Sally's birthday party's this weekend, you need to go see Sally's birthday party, or remember you wanted to see this movie this weekend, or Ginny's mother invited you over for this weekend, they're going to have ponies there, or they're going to go to the movies, things that would make the child want to do something other than spend time with you. That's one aspect. Another aspect from an alienating parent may be saying things such as what I call intensive or over-intensive contact when the child's with you. In other words, the child has a cell phone, the child's getting text once an hour, once every half hour, and sometimes even once every 10 minutes. How are you doing? Are you okay? Are you safe? Anything that causes the child to start becoming concerned that things are not all right being with mommy or daddy when they're with them is going to start setting up an alienating process. We may also have the demands on a child that you've got to choose one parent over the other. In other words, I'm only going to be happy if you're saying negative things about daddy or mommy, the other parent, or every time you say something positive, I'm going to be looking hurt or acting like I'm hurt as a parent. So if these things you're starting to see these kinds of behaviors coming from the other parent, you start seeing some of the things I've already talked about coming from the child, you need to start being concerned that there's a pattern of behavior of alienation going on between the other parent and your child.
And the issue can be so subtle in so many cases that it isn't an easy thing to put a finger on initially. And sometimes, as you mentioned, it's a subconscious behavior with one parent where they're not even aware that they're intentionally doing it, but they have a motive behind and a purpose behind it all.
They may, and we also have to be careful also because there are natural processes that goes on in every parent-child relationship that might be confused by someone who doesn't understand it as being a form of parental alienation. For instance, as we all know, daddy's little girl or mommy's little boy, as they get older, reverse that kind of affectionate closeness that they have with the opposite sex parent and has an affinity or alignment or closer alignment with the same sex parent. That's a natural process. With preschool age children, we know there's always going to be some sign of separation anxiety. So we have to be careful also, on the other hand, that not to confuse these kinds of natural processes that with a conclusion that, of course, alienation must be going on.
Plus, I'm thinking the whole time you're talking here, the poor child in the middle. That's
that's the brutal fact of the matter. And that's why in most well-centered divorces, and that may sound like a contradiction in terms, but there are divorces which are highly contentious and remain so even after the divorce papers and final judgment have been signed by the judge. And that the war rages on with kids. And we know from scientific studies, longitudinal studies done on children in those kinds of environments, those children are not going to fare well as adults. And then you can only extrapolate that data, and that's even in the cases where, that happens even in cases where there is no parental alienation. Parental alienation, if it occurs, has long-term ongoing effects, and it crosses the gambit of effects from dysfunctional adult relationships between you and the opposite sex parent or the same sex partner, loneliness, inability to trust. And one may say, well, these are natural problems that, to a certain extent, we all have, but they are incredibly exacerbated in children who are alienated or children who come from highly contentious divorce backgrounds.
Yeah. The Child-Centered Divorce Network is very sensitive about these issues and trying to help parents avoid them, obviously. But there's the other side. When you are dealing with a contentious divorce co-parent, can you make some suggestions about how a parent who knows they're being targeted can handle, because the children are innocent, even though they may feel very strongly and have been influenced in ways that can be very, very damaging towards another parent. They're victims, obviously, of all of this. So how do you propose that a parent deals with a child that is resisting being with them and not accepting of their parenting and open, loving attachment to the children?
Well, number one, never give up, which means get as much contact as you can possibly get pursuant to whatever order you're traveling under from the court. The child may not want to come, the child may resist coming, but don't give in to that demand or request by the child. And the reason for that is because whenever the child has contact with you, they get to compare the reality of who you really are versus whatever the image that they're being fed by the alienating parent. So consequently, the more time you have, the ability to minimize or somehow undercut the alienation process that's going on. There's people say, well, geez, there's more alienation going on by moms rather than dads, or moms certainly don't get alienated more or are less targeted parents than fathers. And one of the reasons for that is stereotypically, until perhaps recently in the last decade or so, mothers traditionally have gotten more than 50% of the parenting time. Well, if you get 60, 70% of the parenting time, even if the other spouse is trying to alienate you from your child, you have more than ample opportunity to demonstrate to the child who and what you really are. It's when you start giving in to that and giving up to that. So one of the critical things in the courtroom when we have these cases is reestablish some kind of contact no matter what. Second thing is even if you don't have physical face-to-face contact with your child, continue to reach out through letters, emails, Skype, whatever way that you can, in an age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate fashion to your child. Keep copies of everything that you send because the child may not be getting it. However, then you will have the ability to demonstrate to the child, because that day will come when the child is in your care, or visiting with you or having time sharing with you, and the child, you can say, well, did you get this? I sent this to her, or dad or mom, why didn't you ever send me a card? Well, here are all the cards I sent you. Here's copies of them. So at least, again, they can see the reality of who you are and that you never really ever gave up. And that's the critical thing. Don't give up. Dealing with the alienating parent, there are any number of resources in forms of books, in forms of resources on the internet of how to co-parent with alienating or difficult or highly contentious parents. One specifically dealing with parental alienation was published by Dr. Amy Baker. It's available on the internet. I think it's How to Co-Parent with a Toxic Parent. There's another book out there, is How to Co-Parent with a Jerk. But again, so continue to try to establish a record that you're still trying to participate in a centered way in your co-parenting. Don't stop reaching out to your child, and if you can make that connection, never give it up.
Absolutely. I actually was working with a client where the former husband was really, as you said, Roz, discreetly influencing the child. Really didn't see that coming. He was influencing children with money and all of this, but getting that message across of the bad things about mom. And what she really did was amazing. Even though it hurt and she was sad and at times crying on her own and ready to, to react, the knee-jerk reaction, and have a negative rebuttal, so to speak, or a negative comment about the former husband, what she did instead, she basically just killed them with kindness. She made sure that they were hugged and that she loved them, and every time they got together, they had a good time. So it really diffused everything that he was saying, because the children would come and say, well, we're having a great time, and she's wonderful, and we're always laughing. So that in itself was pretty powerful.
Absolutely, and I think what you've done is encapsulate the usual advice I give to potential clients and what not to do, which is don't fight fire with fire. You don't say negative things about the other spouse. What you have to do is remain centered and understand that you have to give your child the space in which they can love both parents and express affectionate feelings about both parents, because they're not getting it in the other household. The second thing that you have to do is what you've done, which is you keep reaching out. Kill them with kindness. In other words, don't fall for the bait. You're always going to be provoked. You're always going to be prodded. They're trying to get an unseemly reaction from you so that they can parade it in front of the judge and say, see, it's justified in what I'm saying to our son or our daughter because he or she, the other parent, is acting in the way I've told our son or daughter that they do act.
And what was amazing, as the children got older, they could then see things for themselves, and they would say to the dad, Dad, we're okay. Or they more or less stood up for themselves and for the mom, and it basically, all the negativity just fell to the wayside, and it didn't have any strength anymore. So, but they were tough years for her, really a lot of tough years when she was tempted.
They will be tough years because you're always waiting, when will my kids be strong enough to stand up? That's either going to happen when the children's age out of the home, they turn 18, they go to school. Anytime you find that they can be in an environment away from the environment of the alienating parent, that's when they can start thinking things through, examining the circumstances, and comparing as objectively as early 20-year-olds and late teens can do between what they actually saw and remember being with the targeted parent versus what the alienating parent is saying to them.
Yeah. So you want to always take the high road and role model the kind of parenting that is ideal for the kids, as tough as it is. And it doesn't always work, because there are thousands of cases of alienated parents all over the world who have lost contact with their children. But hopefully children come to get an awareness of what's happening to them as they get older, start asking more questions, and many times they will come back and try to reestablish a relationship with a parent. But we certainly don't want to wait until years and years pass, and that's why the advice that you're getting today is so useful, because there's always a hope and a chance to reignite that relationship.
Rosalind, you fit it on the head. I mean, psychologically speaking, probably the most primarily important relationship that we have as human beings is that with our parents. And that explains why even children who have been brutally physically abused still reach out and have some kind of connection with those parents who are doing abusing. And even in children who have been sexually abused, part of their therapy is to have some kind of closure with the abusing parent. And that remains primal throughout. So when someone comes up and says, well, you know, Dad was cussing at the visitation, and that made little Johnny afraid, or Dad was doing something like this, something else, or Mom was doing something, those actions have to be incredibly substantial in order to drive a child away. If, in fact, we have children who are physically abused in the fashion they are, still reaching out to make that connection. So they talk about, well, there's alignment, and, you know, you've got children wanting to be developmentally towards one-sex parent. There's a divorce, and older children go to one party or the other in terms of their belief system. Those are all transient phases, and they are not sufficient enough to overcome that strength of that initial primal bond.
And especially if both parents, as Roz and I are always trying to support parents, if they're both taking this as adults and being good doing the co-parenting together and not putting the children in those predicaments or that tough situations, then they won't face that. But it's definitely when it's one-sided, with one trying to alienate the other. I've even seen it where one did have more money and was able to influence the children that way, and one of the parents just said, you know, I might not have the funds, but, you know, I love you, and we can do some fun, simple things. And she went back to basics, and they maybe made cookies or did something simple and fun, and it showed the children that, you know, money can't buy everything, or money isn't everything, and she had to really stick with the basics, and that helped as well. So there are different ways, Charlie, as you're talking about, that we can get around this, and if parents are conscious about it to begin with.
And the problem that we often have is that we see alienation more often occurring in those highly contentious and continuously contentious divorce cases, both before and after the final judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I know one of the most toxic consequences of this is the guilt that children feel. They're so confused and torn when they're being pulled by both parents, and feeling guilty, especially if one parent is weaker in the battle, and sometimes they will align themselves with the stronger parent because they feel there's more power there. Other times they'll align themselves with the weaker parent, but what happens is that the children end up parenting their parents. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about having seen that.
Well, what you have, there's the process called parentification, and that's another subtle form of parental alienation, where they permit they put the child in an untenable position. They have the child making decisions that most children of that age are not considered to have the sufficient maturity, sophistication to make reasonable, rational decisions. For instance, you can choose whether or not you want to go to Dad's house. Well, they're not getting to choose if and when they go to school, and they're not getting to choose if and when they go to the dentist, and they're not getting to choose if and when they take the garbage out, and they're not getting to choose any number of issues in their life. But somehow being with a parent is somewhat lesser than those other decisions. That's a form of parentification, and that's dangerous. The other problem that we have in this area is when and what you're talking about, which is a power struggle, and that may oftentimes be what we call an enmeshed relationship. An enmeshment occurs when there's insufficient or inappropriate parental boundaries occurring. As we're growing up with our children, parents do certain things, children do others, all right? And we are not making our children responsible for our happiness or for our contentment or for what makes the world go round in a correct fashion. It's all turned up topsy-turvy in a enmeshed relationship. None of those boundaries exist, and the child gets the impression that my parents' happiness is dependent upon me and my decisions. And also you have the other extreme in that kind of enmeshment, which is the only time I'm safe is if the targeting parent is happy, and the only time the targeting parent is happy is when I'm virulently against the other parent.
Yeah.
So again, and sometimes these two dynamics are going on at the same time, and you're right, the child doesn't know what's up or down, and when we are children, and thank God we've forgotten this, we live in a world of giants as young children, and we're trying to survive in that world of giants. And if you think that's wrong, next time you talk to your young child and you're asking questions, keep asking the question no matter what the answer is, and you're going to see that child flip-flop all around trying to find the answer that's going to appease the giant who doesn't appear to be happy or content with the answer I'm getting.
Yeah.
And that will tell you everything.
So much pressure and responsibility that doesn't need to be there. Charlie, I want to make sure that our listeners know how to connect with you. I know it's you're in Florida, but you just have such an unbelievable awareness of this. And the website, I know it's on there, but if you'd like to repeat that, and so they'll hear it as well.
The website is www.cjamieson.law.com. That's the website, and we have a section on parental alienation, and we have videos that also deal with parental alienation. And sometime within the next 30 days, there's going to be a free ebook to download on parental alienation and its issues.
And this is open to all parents, so it doesn't matter where they're from, and this can really help.
It doesn't matter where you're from. The advice is general and generic. And I, in my past, I've done consultations and representation of people around the country, not just in
Excellent. And you're also a collaborative attorney, and in the few minutes we have left, I wonder if you could give us a brief understanding of what that option is, because it's one that we highly recommend at the Child-Centered Divorce Network as a viable way of having a less contentious divorce and better outcome.
Absolutely, and we're now shifting 180 degrees from where we were before in a highly contentious arena. Collaborative divorce is simply a process where you are taken out of the courtroom. The parties are put in a position of power to make their decisions and what happens in their case. And you deal with a collection of professionals. Well, I don't say collection, there's usually 4. Both sides still have their attorneys. There's a neutral financial person and a neutral, what we call facilitator, which is usually a mental health professional. What we do is we identify the interests and needs of the parties right from the beginning of the case, and our job is to work the parties through it. The parties have the following obligations. They have to act civilly with one another. One of the reasons why we have a mental health professional as a facilitator, to let everyone know when they're not meeting those goals. 2 is that there will be full disclosure. And 3, that the parties will settle the case, and if either one abandons the case to go to court to litigate, then the attorneys are out, the experts are out, and you start from scratch. One may sort of gasp in horror and say, well, why would you ever enter a process where either one could bail out? Well, number one, you're entering the process after knowing what it's about, and number 2, my sense is, and my experience also is, that few people abandon this process once they've made a financial and emotional commitment to it. And it's not based on positional-based negotiation. Positional-based negotiation is where you go to the used car lot and buy a car. It's worth $50. I got to pay you $20. Oh, well, I can take it down to $45. I'll do $28. You come down, you're just shifting positions. There's no rhyme or reason. You're just trying to get somewhere in between. What we do here is, obviously, people have positions, but we have needs of parties. They need to have a relationship with their children. They need to be financially secure. If there was a family business, it still needs to be running. Who should be doing that, and how do we compensate the other person? And although we take what the law requires as sort of an underpinning, the parties are entering the process knowing that they're not necessarily bound by those limits or those parameters. Again, what we're trying to do is find something that works for everyone based on what they're really looking for at the end of the case. People may say, well, gee, this is a nice kumbaya moment. But truly, if you look at the people who use collaborative divorce, you're going to find that a lot of professionals use it because it provides privacy. You're not in the courtroom. It provides confidentiality. Business people like it because it's for the same thing. People who have run a cash-based business like it because they've seldom have reported, although I don't know any of those, I say, seldom have reported accurately to the IRS what cash they brought in, and they don't want that kind of information being bantered around in public. So there's any number of people who will flock to this kind of process because of privacy issues. It's also a very child-oriented and child-centered process because everyone's there for the. If you talk to anyone, any couple who's participated in the process of children, the reason they're there is they want to end the divorce, being able to be civil to one another, so that they can show up to their children's graduations, their weddings, the christening of their grandchildren, and not be walking into an armed camp at war with one another. And so their kids are not worried about who am I going to offend if I spend too much more time with mom versus dad, and do I have to invite Uncle Lou and not Aunt Sally on the other side? So you're eliminating all these issues. And so if you wanted to have your divorce be private, you want to be child-centered, and you wanted to end up on a sane kind of basis, and you want to spend a lot less money than you would in court, then collaborative law is the way to go.
Excellent.
You really gave that a very, very well defined and clear, and I just want to endorse the fact that it is so much more child-focused, because when you're ending a divorce, co-parenting is just beginning.
Absolutely.
You have decades ahead of that parenting, and what Charlie said is so true. All of those life occasions can be so much easier and smoother if you're starting out and not being in a contentious, high-conflict situation. So I'm so glad that that process is being practiced more and more in around the nation, and it just makes so much sense from so many different perspectives.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
And again, ironically, what happens here is that parties who were having difficulty speaking to one another before they begin the process, you learn better communication skills, you're communicating with one another better, you end your divorce actually being more civil, more friendly than you began.
That's fabulous. And I love the fact that there's a mental health counselor as an integral part of it, because so much of divorce is really about emotional and psychological needs and well-being, and so having that piece of the puzzle just is a much wiser way of approaching the entire process.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, we were not given any parent skills when we became parents, and we certainly don't have the skills when we're going through the divorce either. So definitely that's important to have all that professional support. Charlie, it's been just an honor and a thrill to have you on the show today, and we're really excited about having you here, and you've offered so much information to support our listeners. And Charlie, once again, your website?
It's www.cjamiesonlaw.com.
That's great. And it's been, once again, as I said, we appreciate you being on the show, and we thank you very much for taking the time to be here.
It's been an honor and a privilege for me to do so.
Definitely. And Roz, any last minute?
I just want to remind people that if you have any connections with parental alienation, if you feel that may be something that you're dealing with or may be dealing with and want to learn more, because Parental Alienation Awareness Day is the 25th of April, there's a lot of information that's available on Charlie's site, as well as if you Google it on the internet, so you can get help and support and a clearer understanding of what's involved in this very, very difficult issue. And if you want to learn more about collaborative law, then Charles Jamieson's website will have a lot of information about that as well. So thank you all.
Definitely. And also to see this show again, you can go to divorceview.com, as well as we now have a podcast for the show as well. So if you're on the go and can only listen to it, you have that availability as well. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.